9, so I'll go ahead and read the intro, and that way, by the time I'm done with the intro, whoever is here can start participating, etc. But good evening, everyone. James Hancock here. Thanks for joining us for what I hope will be the first of a series of live streams on this topic. In my opinion, Dune is one of the most colossal achievements of the human imagination in the last 100 years. Essentially, an inexhaustible topic, and one that I want to explore thoroughly over the next year and a half, waiting for the release of the first part of Denis Villeneuve's movie adaptation. So today we're going to be starting with an overview of the history of the franchise, the books, the various film and TV adaptations, and in the spirit of the Atreides family, we'll be looking into the future as well. Just to give you an idea of my level of expertise, because I've not yet earned my black belt on this topic, I grew up on the Lynch adaptation. I've read the first 3 of Frank Herbert's novels, and I'm currently working on the 4th, God Emperor of Dune. And I've watched Jodorowsky's Dune countless times. I think it's the best movie ever made about the creative process, one that underlines the fact that in adapting Dune, a filmmaker's ambition should be nothing short of the most ambitious film ever attempted by human beings. But joining me today for this discussion, we have filmmaker Bill Scurry, co-host of the I Don't Get It podcast, and riding shotgun, we have producer Adam Rackoff, who has agreed to help us stay on top of answering questions from both Twitter as well as here in the live stream. We'll probably go about 45 minutes before we completely open the conversation to all questions. But if someone has a burning desire to use the super chat option, those questions will obviously receive priority throughout the live stream. At any rate, enough rambling on my part. Let's get Bill into the conversation. Before we go completely down the rabbit hole, introduce yourself, Bill. And then for anyone out there who is new to this subject but is curious, give us a quick overview, if you don't mind, of the saga of Dune as you see it.
All right. Well, my name is Bill Scurry. I'm broadcasting live from Siege Lagavulin.
Beautiful. Nice. I'm going sober because I don't want to completely make a spectacle of myself tonight.
So your water shall mingle with our water.
It is my privilege.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm an erstwhile filmmaker. I do a lot of video editing, do a lot of podcasting. I got my own show called I Don't Get It. I do my friend Noah Tarnow. James, you've been a guest on the show. Very gratefully. I guess that's sort of my thing. I'm a knucklehead on Twitter. You can catch me at William Scurry. We're usually doing the wrong real thing, which is great. But you called me here today because of Dune, and I'm flattered for that because Dune is kind of like one of the best. Look, I grew up a Star Wars kid for sure. I mean that gets their hooks in you for sure. But I think that when Dune came out in '84, there was just a different feel to it. And I saw it in the theaters. So I guess I was 9 years old when it came out. And my dad took me to see it because he took us to see everything. I saw The Thing in the theater just a couple of years earlier than that. And it was a movie that maybe some of the people who are on board now will remember when it came out. They handed out a glossary. There was an actual glossary that came out. Which the book has an appendix that it has a glossary at the back of it. But for a movie to give you a glossary of term of definitions that you would need to know what a still suit was, what suspense.
But that was kind of a 70 millimeter thing where you would if you went to see How the West Was Won or whatever, if you saw something in 70 millimeter, they would give you these programs. They made it almost like a Broadway show in a lot of ways.
That's almost like the road show. Like they did that with Tarantino, with Hateful Eight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they gave out a book. I'm sure they do with a few other things. So that was, I had not heard of Dune for, even a single second before it came out. Cold. My first impression of it was in the theaters in '84. And for me, that was enough. I hadn't seen, maybe I saw bits and pieces of Elephant Man before that. But getting a taste of Dune in the theater was the very first impression I had of it. It's like for a kid who grew up on sci-fi, I'd never seen anything like that, ever. And even, to this day, there's a real hold over it for me. Not just the 9-year-old's brain, but there is something insane about what David Lynch put together. And I'm not even a big fan. If you want to refer back, James.
You always talk about how it's the only David Lynch movie that you like. Yeah, obviously you love David Lynch, but I'm right there with you. I was 8 when I saw the movie in the theater, and that's what was my initial hook because I was 19 when I first read the novel. So for a decade, the movie was all I had.
Mm-hmm. And we did a podcast, I want to say about 3 years ago. That's an important bit of reference too. If you guys want to go back in the wrong reel annals, we did a really nice rollicking roundtable with me as like the hardest core of the hardcores and some people like Martin Kessler who were a little cooler on it and a couple of other people who weren't really into it altogether, but it was a really fun discussion. Marcus Penn, I think maybe was the most blue chill on it. But that's like an appendix or an addenda to this discussion. But yeah, Dune got into my brain when I was 9 years old, and it never crawled back out again. So I mean, like, you wanted a brief synopsis of the Dune
say I've
saga.
never read a book or never read any of the Dune books, and say I've never experienced anything about the Dune movies or TV shows, but I'm excited about Denis Villeneuve because I love Denis Villeneuve. And I came to you and said, Bill Scurry, what the hell is Dune? It'd be like someone saying, what the hell is Lord of the Rings? Like, how can you explain it in a cogent fashion, just to give an idea of what the broad overview of at least what the first novel is, which will obviously be adapted into 2 movies by Denis Villeneuve.
Well, picture the feudal system that you identify with the Middle Ages in Europe, the medieval system in outer space. And you have a lot of that jockeying that, if you paid attention to history, whether it's the papacy, if it was the Holy Roman Empire, the breaking up of the Roman Empire, the founding of the Holy Roman Empire, and the sort of divisions that created modern Europe, or at least medieval to Renaissance Europe, has a lot to do with what Herbert was going for with Dune. So you have essentially spaceships, you have space travel, you have alien races, you have planets, but you have fiefdoms, you have serfs, you have royal houses, you have earls and dukes and tithes and fiefdoms. And you just take that stuff and plant it in outer space, and you get instantly something different than Gene Roddenberry. You get something different than George Lucas. You get something different than fucking The Black Hole, Maximilian Schell, Tony Perkins.
And technically, Frank Herbert beat all of them to the punch because the novel, I think, was published in '65. So, yeah, Star Trek wasn't even underway yet.
Right. I'm trying to think of what sci-fi. I mean, you had Ursula K. Le Guin. I mean, you had Asimov had written all those things back then.
H.G. Wells, and obviously tons of stuff like in the world of like the pulps and all the various sci-fi and horror and fantasy magazines rolling around in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Right. Robert Heinlein had written Starship Troopers, I think, in the 50s. Yeah, there's a heady tradition. I mean, it comes more out of those things than it does the sort of pop sci-fi of like Roddenberry and Shatner and Lucas and THX and the sort of 70s gloss, the late 60s, 70s gloss. It comes more out of Asimov, I think, than anything else, which is one of those things that might be why it defies translation to the screen so much, because it reads more like text than Star Wars, which reads like a screenplay, something like that. So the story is very simple. There are a few planets in the Imperium. There's an imperial system, as I think I've made explicit. There's an emperor, and there are different houses, the same way there was in Europe, and they squabble with each other, not unlike Westeros, right? That's part of the, I mean, I see in what R.R. Martin is doing very closely with what Herbert did, in that people love the dynastic squabbles, and people love skullduggery and knives tipped with poison, and Dune has all those things, but it also happens to have these large segmented worms that live in a sand planet on top of everything else too. So you have this one planet. In the middle of it, everybody knows the giant worms because they're familiar with the iconography. And inside the sand is the excrescence of those worms, which is this substance called spice. And people got hooked on it. They started harvesting it. They got hooked on it. It is what Herbert in the book calls a geriatric spice, which means it prolongs and extends life and also extends consciousness too. So you have the entire universe is essentially hooked to this thing, and it lives on one planet. So all the drama, all this stuff comes out of the intrigue of just managing what it's like to have this thin little supply that can get crimped very easily from the planet Arrakis, which, the book is called Dune. I don't think anybody actually ever calls it Dune in the books. I mean, it's
very, I think, very rarely. It's always Arrakis and then later Arrakis once the planet gets changed. But is it the best one-word, one-syllable title for a story ever? Like, Ron's a good one. But Dune, like, how can you beat just? It's so simple, and so like Star Wars is 2 syllables, and that's very beautiful, very simple. But Dune, it makes it so mysterious and so just insurmountable. Oh, but quick interruption! I'm looking at the super in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. Shout out to John Cribbs. Shout out to Tony Stella. Shout out to everybody who is tuning in so far. Thank you, everybody, for hopping into the chat. We are glad to see you guys here, geeking out with us.
John, this is for you, buddy.
Yeah, John Cribbs was there for our previous Dune podcast way back when, and Tony Stella has been on Wrong Reel 100 million times. Well, at any rate, so what is the I guess then the drama? We've got this spice. How does Paul Atreides, aka Muad'Dib, aka the Kwisatz Haderach, how does he figure into this overall story?
Well, he is the son of the Duke Leto, and Duke Leto gets the governorship of this planet, and there's treachery afoot. And so the family is killed more or less, and Paul Atreides is kicked out into the desert to find his way. As it turns out, this kid is a genetically pinpointed. I don't want to say a super being, but they keep calling him that. He has certain predilections towards prescience, and his senses are augmented in a way that other people aren't by this spice. So the thing is that in the treachery,
in addition to the crazy training he's had as a kid, his mother's trained him as a Bene Gesserit, and obviously Dr. Yui's taught him science, and Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck have taught him swordplay, and like Thufir Howard's taught him how to be a man. It's like he has so many wonderful disciplines. Oh, now speaking of Duncan Idaho, Cheryl Yara, she just did a donation in the super chat. We were talking earlier about Duncan Idaho on Twitter, and she was asking how come he got killed off. And yeah, if you like Duncan Idaho, keep reading the books. He comes back again and again and again and again. So if you like Duncan, you will get him a lot as you read the saga. And obviously, he's being played by the great Aquaman himself.
Yeah. Oh God, this is a very special occasion. Sky Wingfield is up. It is like 5 a.m. over there right now, or
I think, but
we're
4 hours ahead because they don't have daylight savings till the end of March. So technically, Sky's up at a little past 1. But Sky, shout out to one of our buddies over in Cardiff, who we've done many podcasts with in the past, and check out his film site, Film 89.
That's huge. So yeah, Paul is he's been made ready to accept this weird gift that the actual substance unlocks in his body, because he does. He is this avatar of training, and that he is prepared mentally, he's prepared physically, he's prepared emotionally for it to some degree, although nothing can quite prepare him for what comes through in the book. So the spice unlocks all these incredible powers inside of him. Essentially, it's prescience. He's able to see forward, backwards through time. And he gets this, he becomes larger than just a 16, 17-year-old kid. He really becomes something like a titanic force that the universe has never seen. So he winds up coalescing this effort of all the people who live in the rocks. There's these disregarded warrior caste of these, what do they call them? Zensuni monks almost. They're like warrior monks who live in the planet, these extremely stringent people who learn how to live in a desert, learn how to live without water, and he becomes their chosen one. And the apex of the book is that he takes them, becomes their warlord, marches them back, and assumes control of the empire from the powers, the dissolute powers, the corrupt forces that in fact destroyed his house and pushed him out into the desert. So that's the very first book in a nutshell, and it ends like any good movie from the 70s, the early 80s. It just ends right on the button of, and he wins over the emperor, go to black.
Yep. It finishes right at the emotional peak. Also, quick shout out into the chat room. And we got Joe Duffy. We got John Armenio.
Yeah.
We've got a couple familiar. Oh, we got Martin Kessler. What's up, Mr. Kessler? Yeah, we got a lot of familiar faces here. That's awesome.
That's cool.
But what I love about the book, and I've read it 3 times now, and I think it's one of the great works of fiction that I've ever read in any genre from any period, how it's ultimately this brilliant cautionary tale about how when you overthrow tyranny, there is always this huge risk of replacing said tyranny with yet another form of tyranny. And at the back of Paul's mind the entire time are these visions of this possible universal jihad with armies of Fremen, as well as his father's old soldiers like Gurney Halleck leading the charge. And he's wondering, well, how do I prevent this from happening? And how can I get revenge on all these people who murdered my father and betrayed us? How can we get revenge on the Baron and revenge on the Emperor, but at the same time not create this horrible future? And I love, heavy lies the crown, as they always say. And I find that journey fascinating. And as I was rereading the book a couple of days ago, there's a beautiful little couple sentence passage that I'd never even noticed before, where he's looking ahead and seeing possible futures. And there's this brief little moment where he pictures a path where he embraces Baron Harkonnen, as spoiler alert, because this is public knowledge, as his grandfather, and they join forces. And it's like that's like the even bleaker and darker than the jihad. And so I just love the fact that he, as this young man, has all these burdens thrust upon him, while at the same time he's being driven by this desperate need for revenge and getting back what was taken from him.
Yeah, a lot of what he sees, the prescience and the thing is, he's not the only person in this story with prescience. It's really interesting that it is most everyone in Dune is over 100 years old just because the spice extends your life. But then there are these other castes. You have the sort of warrior nun caste of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, of which just about every single female character, with the exception of Chani, is a member of. It insinuates itself heavily. And they are masters of the physical form, the nervature and the musculature and the sense of sort of serenity of the self. They've created this breeding program. Paul, in fact, the fact that Paul has all these abilities is because he's the tip of the spear for centuries. I think they said 90 generations of pruning bloodlines to get to the point where you have a person who—
How many bloodlines were pruned in order to create Bill Scurry?
Not enough. Go back to Long Island in the 70s. I think they should have pruned a few more, for Christ's sake. So the Bene Gesserit used the spice for their own separate ends, which have a lot to do with the inward, the control of the body. And then there's the extremely technical end, the Asimovian end, the spacefaring end is the mathematics, the combination of, I guess, the Mentats, who I guess the Mentats don't exactly use spice. They're just involved with the trade. It's more the Guild. The Guild is this guy. We can't not talk about the Guild.
Especially since they all look like I do in David Lynch's movie. The Bene Gesserits and the Spacing Guild all have copied my haircut. Or maybe I took inspiration from them. But if I had a little tube going in the side of my head with goo coming out, it'd be the perfect Spacing Guild cosplay. But yeah, with the Mentats, I just love how this is an environment. It's a sci-fi environment without computers because of the Butlerian Jihad, where they eventually came to the conclusion, you shall not create something that resembles a man's mind. And so they train these living, breathing supercomputers who oftentimes are the most terrifying assassins of them all. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. And obviously Thufir Hawat has been serving the Atreides family for many generations, but not every Mentat's necessarily that good a guy, as we see with Piter and some others.
Yeah, actually, one of the biggest differences, or I should say, one of the gigantic hooks that the book got me with, because before we get back to the narrative, and I think people are sort of getting the general gist. If they've never seen it, we're going to get into it, and I think it'll be made understood. But personally, for Dune, the reason why we're having this discussion is because of what it really means to me and why it hits differently. I was going to say that the Butlerian Jihad is one of those things, when I started reading the book, is like insane that it does not show up in Lynch's version of the movie, because it's so cool. I mean, it is something that doesn't exist in all of sci-fi. What is that thing? That's the singularity. It is essentially the dealing with the singularity, which people have been writing about for decades. But it's like all of a sudden, you do have Asimov and the Robot Trilogy and all that stuff, Foundation.
I love the Foundation. Well, the first 3 Foundation books, so I can't speak of it beyond that.
Right. Herbert goes a little to the left and, says that, something like artificial intelligence would merit another commandment in the Bible, not just like an amendment to the Constitution, but quite literally an amendment to the Bible. It would change, liturgical thought. It would change faith. That's how, you do have something like the Butlerian Jihad, where thinking machines enslaved humans for thousands of years until humans turn the tide against them. And so Dune is, I think, 10,000 years after the Butlerian Jihad. That's what's amazing, is that, it is essentially, it's not far enough in the future as it is. If you just think what happened in the past, how the fuck far from our current time today was the Butlerian Jihad? Is that like 30,000 years, 50,000 years?
I love it. It makes the story all the more timeless. In the absence of computers, there are few details that will date the material. And rereading this book now, it's over 50 years old. Never at any point was like, oh, that's kind of silly. That feels like something from the 60s. Like, the way a lot of Star Trek episodes have aged and feel very much of their time. Dune, because it's so philosophical and so political and so spiritual and all about ecology and about so many giant concepts, it seems ageless. And you might do a few little tweaks here and there with like certain movie versions and TV versions, but I feel like it's perfectly primed to be relevant in just about any era in which you choose to adapt it, because of that abandoning of computers.
Yeah, and it's strange, because whoever thought to do that before? It's almost like a simple workaround. It's like, whatever, like Roger Ebert would say about, is something in your movie, could your movie just collapse under the pressure of one phone call? If one phone call would just dismantle all of your plot work, you don't have a very strong script. And, people just would say like a wizard did it when it comes to robots. A lot of sci-fi is just to say, here's a bunch of shit. We don't need to explain it. But it's like, imagine taking away artificial intelligence. Imagine taking away robots. And just like, how much have robots insinuated themselves into all sci-fi?
Just about the question, but someone says, if I dropped off in the woods naked with an axe, how long would it take you before you could send an email? It's like, like how dependent upon technology we have become. And I love how, a Mentat doesn't need a computer. He is the computer, and he's totally self-reliant. But in the interest of time, I do want to switch gears a little bit, because in our previous podcast, you spoke very movingly about some of your emotional responses to the movie. So basically, now some of the preliminaries are out of the way, I do want to talk specifically about what makes the story so compelling to you personally, because we could spend all night simply regurgitating the text and talking about all the details, because it's so rich. Like I said, you could spend days, if not weeks, just talking about all the rich detail. But that's something that's already been done on so many other channels. But I want to hear specifically, what was it about seeing Lynch's adaptation and then your first reading the novel that had a personal impact on Bill Scurry? Because I feel like the rest is all there to be discovered. So I kind of want to get your personal take on why you think it just had such a lock on you.
All right, everybody, let's get real for a minute here. So my childhood was kind of a mess. All right. I didn't have a strong father figure. My dad was kind of a galloping ogre, as was the time back in Long Island in which I grew up. Let me tell you something. When I saw Jürgen Prochnow on the balcony with Kyle MacLachlan on that rainy ledge in Caladan, and Jürgen Prochnow says to Kyle MacLachlan, Thufir Hawit's trained something like 4 generations of Atreides. He says, you're his finest pupil. And he goes, Dr. Yui and Duncan Idaho say the same thing. It makes me proud. And Paul goes, I want you to be proud of me. It's like, I looked, it came right through the screen. I was seeing this movie with my father. The man, imperfect man though he was a human being. But it's like, there was the apex of what a father could be. The bearded man from Das Boot. And this humanist face, this bearded stuff, like he in fact may have been the perfect casting for Duke Leto as he's described in the book. You're talking about a man who's ready for everything, but also his face is sort of avuncular, if not paternal at the same time. And to get that hit from the movie is just insane. It's like, I maybe had the same shaggy haircut as MacLachlan did. I guess MacLachlan was 22 or 23 when the movie came out.
His hair was epic. It was thick.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Robust. Look at this. Do you see what I got to do with here?
Hey, look who you're talking to.
I'm just one step away from you. But the connection of, like, if Dune is this cri de coeur of, a son's want to get revenge, this horrible injustice, and it's like, it does stick with the movie, where it begins where he's looking up, where are my feelings? I don't feel anything, after he learns his dad has died, and then he later on learns to cry. He winds up earning the tears, essentially.
Yes, the end of the first part of the novel, like, it's divided into 3 sections, and he finally allows himself to weep once he and Chani are alone together.
Yeah, I mean, it means all the world to him, because I think, like a lot of like wealthy families, Gilded Age families, we all know these things now, because the history of like Rockefellers and people like that have been, and Vanderbilts, the children weren't raised by the parents. The children were raised by a retinue of nurses and handlers and, equestrian teachers and whatnot. People would only see their parents at dinner when they would grow up in a great house. That was sort of the way people did things in castles, if you were one of those royal families. And I'm getting the impression that Paul didn't really bump into his dad a whole lot.
Yeah, spent a lot of time with Gurney, spent a lot of time with Duncan, but his dad, his dad was busy. When they were first arriving on the planet in the novel, his dad's going days without sleep, attending to every little detail, and he's kind of bumping into his son and having important conversations when he can, but he's got so many responsibilities, which is why it makes it so, like, for me, the same feeling you have with Paul and his father is the emotion I feel when he bumps into Gurney, and Patrick Stewart just sells it so well. It's like, you young pup, and he's kind of clasping into him. It gives me just, my hair on my arm is sticking straight out. It gives me a wave of goosebumps every single time. I fucking love it. It just makes me want to weep with joy when those two are reunited, because Gurney, in so many ways, is the father that he knew on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the thing is, Dune, I'm a sucker. It's a fucking cliche to get a 43-year-old dude with my hairline, and I'm going to sit here and hammer on the father-son thing. But it's fucking true. Like, my thing with movies, I didn't realize this until maybe it was in the late 20s or in my 30s, where it's like, oh, I'm an idiot because these things got their hook in me. Maybe it took a bunch of years of therapy to see that father-son stories, just because of my own upbringing, where my dad hasn't been around since like 89 or 90, to see the anthem of that. And Dune is the story that just doesn't have one father figure. It's got like three, right? I mean, you can count. He's got his own dad. He's got Gurney. I mean, to a certain degree, Toofer Howard is the ego. Gurney is more like the id. Or maybe Thufir's the superego, but then Stilgar winds up being this almost like not emotionless, but he's a very sort of stern father figure.
At first, he's a surrogate father, then he's a friend, and then ultimately, in the book, Paul kind of mourns this moment where Stilgar starts becoming a believer. It's like, he didn't want to have his friend become a believer in the Muad'Dib religion. It's kind of a sad pivot point, but also we're overlooking just how unbelievably crucial Jessica is, and particularly in the first third of the book, where so many of the chapters are POV chapters. And what's cool about Frank Herbert is that I've very rarely seen a writer who can do this, where in the middle of a chapter from one character's POV, he will switch between 4 or 5, and it's not distracting, and it's not jarring, it's not confusing. And that's, when George R. R. Martin, when he writes a chapter, it's like, this is the Tyrion Lannister chapter, and boom, you're all in on his point of view until the end of that chapter. Frank Herbert can kind of just flow from one to another, but there's so many crucial early chapters from Jessica's point of view. And I think, obviously, without the Bene Gesserit training, he would not be the Kwisatz Haderach.
No, I mean, he not just the genetic program, but he quite literally needed the voice to survive.
Yeah. Love the voice.
That's the hypnotic suggestion voice. And the thing is, even the Bene Gesserit have what do they call it? Battle language, like Chakabsa. There's these archaic forms of communication, which show up more, I think, in the sequels. There's a scene in Dune Messiah where Gaius Helen Mohiam is talking to Irulan, and they're having two different sets of conversations because they're actually hand gesturing one dialogue while speaking with it. It's a really cool scene. They actually did it in John Harrison's Children of Dune miniseries. They illustrated that pretty well. But yeah, she's really important too. I mean, and she's a completely different. You have this parent figure in Leto, who's much different than Jessica. Like, Jessica is, the way I understood, my mother was the emotional load bearer in our household too. She was the person who was allowed to be. My father learned his values from the 50s and 60s, so he was not an emotional parent, but my mother was. And Jessica, I can see, did a lot more of the child rearing. Maybe she saw a lot more of him, because you can tell he got the teaching from her. I mean, it was administered through hours of sitting in front of her and learning about the things that he does later on in Dune, in Children of Dune. When Jessica is I'm getting ahead of myself. She's talking to Faradin, and she's saying, look at your hands. Imagine your hands backwards. Imagine your hands forwards. And it's like, oh, this is the training Paul went through, but he was probably 11 or 10 when she did these things that she's doing with Faradin. Again, I'm eclipsing myself here, but these things are all a continuum. I mean, it's funny that you mention Stilgar being regarded by Paul as a follower, because that is kind of like the fulcrum on which Dune ends and Dune Messiah begins. It's like that's Herbert tipping his hand a little bit to where he was going to sort of follow the sequel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, the female characters, I think you've commented on this a bunch of times in terms of, like, Chani is this really well-written character. Gaius Helen Mohiam is a very well-written character.
She could easily be my mother. But yeah, I mean, Aaliyah the knife is so damn cool. And granted, it's hard to do it well on film, because Aaliyah, she's a toddler with, like, all the memories and powers and skills of a Bene Gesserit mother. And, like, how do you do that without it? I mean, I at age 8, the David Lynch version of Aaliyah I thought was awesome. I thought she was incredible. Like, how can this be? Like, I mean, I loved her. But when you read the book, you're like, oh my God, there's so much eerie, creepy, brilliant material there. And obviously, in the second and third book, remains a major character. So she's absolutely fascinating. Chani, sadly, in the movie, they don't really get into the fact that her father, Liet Kynes, was the ecologist, is helping them rebuild the entire planet with this, like, 4 or 5 century long plan they've got underway. And I love how, once again, I mean, there's so many great takeaways from this overall story about how Stilgar, by the third book, is kind of bemoaning what Arrakis has become, and how the Fremen culture as a result of achieving their greatest desire of having control over their own destiny and starting to terraform the planet, that all the values that made the Fremen who they are kind of starting to slide, and he kind of bemoans that. So once again, it's like going back to the whole idea of how rebels oftentimes will replace one form of tyranny with yet another form of tyranny, how sometimes what you wish isn't necessarily what you really want or need. And Stilgar learns that the hard way after he's seen what Arrakis slowly but surely becomes.
Yeah, my friend used to have this. My friend who grew up and he was in college at the end of the '60s. He would say to me very cynically when I was hanging out with him in the '90s, he would say, "Yeah, you know what? I'll sign up for your revolution. If you got a better way, okay, I'm on." He goes, "Can you keep the trains running on time? Will the lights turn on in the morning?" And it's like frequently that doesn't happen.
Yep.
You take over the revolution, all of a sudden it looks like Egypt, where it's like, oh, the guy who was here beforehand, things were really shitty in that, you were getting drills in the kneecap. However, the lights were on and the trains ran on time. And it's like sometimes the revolution doesn't take into account
Franco's dictatorship in Spain and things like that, where like when I was in Spain in the 90s, some older people would bemoan the loss of how regimented the country was, but while he was in power, be like, oh, he's horrible. But yeah, it's Frank Herbert's, his depth and his broad-mindedness and his sensitivity with which he tackles that topics. I feel like so many storytellers fall into the trap of activism or a one-sided view. But Frank, I feel like he spent like 30 years on a mountain drinking green tea and meditating about all these incredible concepts, because he just comes across as so infinitely wise. But obviously he, like anybody, evolved over time. But he spent about 1.5 years writing the book, and I think he spent about 6 or 7 years researching it. But didn't he get the idea when he was writing some newspaper article just about some sand dunes in Oregon or something like that? And somehow that was like the catalyst for how this extraordinary saga came to be, which, I mean, Lord of the Rings, all 3 books together, even if you include Silmarillion and The Hobbit, it's like 800 pages of text, and it's got an enormous amount of depth and history and detail. But I feel like Frank Herbert's accomplishment and his narrative and his just overall tapestry is just as rich. But in that, we are starting to get close to when we're going to open things up to questions. I have a few more questions for you. Frank Herbert is obviously the godfather of this world, but so many brilliant actors, artists, musicians, etc., have all played a role in fleshing out this world, making it more interesting. People like Chris Foss, who never read the book, just the script, but did some great, beautiful stuff for Jodorowsky, Moebius, Giger. I mean, obviously, as Jodorowsky said, he was searching for the deepest darkness of the soul. He had like an ill art, but he was perfect for the Harkonnens. But then you have guys like Feng Zhu, who was doing concept art for a video game that never happened. And maybe best of all, yeah, I need probably Tony Stella's help on this, but John Schoenherr,
Shaner,
gotcha, who's one of the first artists to bring this world to life, who did a series of brilliant illustrations back in the 60s when the books were first being published. But I would love to hear which of these individuals from the various film and TV adaptations, as well as the books and video games, which of these creators have had the most enduring contribution in your eyes in terms of expanding this overall tapestry?
That's interesting. They're kind of jagged. I mean, the movie was my entry into it. The book, if I watched the movie in '84, I didn't read the book until '94. It was a decade between me being 9 and 19. And so the visual motif was the thing that really got me. I would almost say Bob Ringwood, who should not be underestimated. Bob Ringwood designed the still suits, and he designed the Michael Keaton Batman costume too, which
cool.
Yeah, if you look into it, there's a lot of similarity. And Carlo Rambaldi, who designed the aliens from Close Encounters and E.T., the armatures, also designed the sandworms too. So you have that spark of whatever De Laurentiis pulled together. In the past few years, man, I tell you, that Marvel Comics adaptation, which is a little forgotten. I mean, no one gave a fuck about it when it came out. And I was sharing some pages with you guys today with you and
I grabbed
Rackoff.
an issue when it hit the stands. I can't remember which issue I had, but yeah, you would have like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Dune comics or Return of the Jedi comics. There were Krull comics. I mean, any cool fantasy or sci-fi movie would get of 2, 3, 4 issue limited series from Marvel, and yeah, Dune was no exception.
Yeah, so the story by that one was pretty much a straight up adaptation by Ralph Macchio, who I worked with back in
not the Karate Kid, but the other one.
No, the middle aged guy from Brooklyn who actually worked with when I was an intern at Marvel Comics in the '90s. But Bill Sienkiewicz, man, Bill Sienkiewicz. It was right in the middle of his Daredevil stuff. He did this mix. It was right before Elektra Assassin. It was like the year before Elektra Assassin. So Bill Sienkiewicz.
Was he finished with his Moon Knight stuff at that point, or is he still ongoing?
No, Moon Knight. I think Moon Knight was done by '81 or '82. And Moon Knight, he was doing. Who was he swiping? He was swiping a lot of like Miller and things like that. Sienkiewicz didn't develop his idiosyncratic style. That was around the time of New Mutants.
Yeah, when he truly became Sienkiewicz.
Yes.
And I remember it was so much so that as a kid, it kind of scared me. Every time I opened up a page of New Mutants, I was like, do I really want to go into this guy's head? But yeah, Lockheed and all those characters look so bizarre.
And I couldn't fucking stand Sienkiewicz. I thought that his style, compared to like the smooth line art, I mean, I'm sorry if we're nerding out on comic book shit. I know like half of you will probably know exactly what we're talking about. Maybe half of you have no idea because comics are an antiquated form. We're talking about the sweet spot of like 84. Like Arthur Adams had this really smooth line art style. And that was, I think, what everybody loved. And then on the other side, maybe I just didn't know that I'm going to have to grow up into Sienkiewicz's line art, and I was going to get there. But that Dune adaptation is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's fucking gorgeous. It's a mixture of photorealism. It's a mixture of storytelling.
It's still recognizable as an adaptation of Lynch's Take, where it feels familiar if you like the movie and you want more. But at the same, if the movie was David Lynch's interpretation of Frank Herbert, this is Sienkiewicz's interpretation of David Lynch. So it's a strange kind of like 6 degrees of separation back to the Frank Herbert source material, but it works.
Imagine if Denny O'Neil, just pulling out of my asshole, if Denny O'Neil and fucking Neil Adams did an adaptation of 2001. Seriously, I can't think
Jack
of
Kirby did. Jack Kirby took the
Jack Kirby. No,
bull by the horns.
I don't know if Jack Kirby did an adaptation. He did a spin-off series.
Okay, or maybe it was a continuation.
It was really weird. Yeah, I have those. They're sitting in my closet. I lent them to John Cribbs a few years ago, I think, or I meant to lend them to John Cribbs. But yeah, like so the comic books come in there, the movies, the costumes are in there. A lot of the art I've seen on DeviantArt. It's funny, but like this is one of those. I don't want to say dispossessed, but it sits a little bit in the bargain bin in terms of like literary franchises. I know that no one's like scheming to make a Handmaid's Tale style Hulu series out of Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness.
Left Hand of Darkness is brilliant. The first time I read Dune, it was this class at UVA called Fantasy and Social Values. It was an anthropology class where we would study anthropology in the context of sci-fi or fantasy novels. And Dune was in the mix. Ender's Game was in the mix. Left Hand of Darkness was one. I believe Moat in God's Eye. Anyway, it was cool class, and it was like the best way to start my first year of college, where I could just geek out on this stuff and have it be considered homework.
Yeah, actually, this is great because when the book came out in 2000, and when I read the book, I should say in 1994, this is an anecdote I wanted to make sure I saved for the air, because you asked me when we were girding for this, like what makes me the guy to talk about it. In 93, I was going to LIU, Long Island University, and I was taking my first, I guess, classics classes in school. And I remember they handed out these texts, and I have a fucking copy of like Jude the Obscure, and I got my first copy of like Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And man, you're not going to hear from me. I'm not going to sit here and slander Charlotte Bronte. They're canonical works of literature. I
read Jane Eyre in 8th grade. I remember one image or one scene. It was not the right time.
I'm reading Return to the Native by fucking yeah, the guy who wrote, I'm blanking here, Return to the Native by the guy who wrote Jude the Obscure. So I'm sitting there.
I don't know. I just picked up this is my copy of Dune from a fresh fall of 1995 at UVA. See, I bought it at a discount. You still got the used sticker on it, but it's well thumbed at this point and it's turning completely brown.
It was the mass market version. Yeah. So I'm sitting there in class and it's the first time I'm reading Jane Eyre and I'm like, all right, I've heard of this, but it's like, this is what college is going to be. This is what this book is going to be. And I'm daunted because it's Victorian. I mean, maybe it's even earlier than Victorian. Maybe it's like Elizabethan or whatever. I don't know what the fuck it is, but I'm like, this is so alien to me. I don't know what is going on in Jane Eyre. I don't know what the fuck is going on in Thomas Hardy, not Tom Hardy, the cool actor who played Bane. But it's like these things are so alien, and yet I picked up Dune while I was on jury duty in Riverhead, Long Island, 94, and I'm reading about the Landsrod, and I'm reading. It's like for some reason this book is more contemporary. This book means more, even though it's set in the year 10,191, than anything that took place in the Victorian period. And I could not tell you why I had to go to class. I had to go to English, 301, 201, Comp, Lit, all the rest of those classes en route to my bachelor's degree, and feel like I'm reading, with the exception of every now and then, a Vonnegut or a William Dean Howells or a Henry Miller, somebody like who cracks through. But for the most part, it's like these stories don't mean fucking shit to me. And yet, something so alien that takes place on a world where there's fucking worms running around and people who are recapturing urine and feces that are processed in the thigh pads
Absolutely.
means so much more to me. Like I can get into this thing, and it's like that was it. Its hooks were in, and I'm like, it was a study in contrast where it's like I see how college is going to go from 93 to 97. Me and literature are going to have a tough time. But me and Frank Herbert, though, we're going to be lifelong buddies. We're in it for the long haul.
Beautiful. Well, before because we got 5 minutes, so we open up the door to questions from the chat. So my last question for you, I hope you've been indulging in a nice little spice trance leading up to this, because it's time to test your powers of prescience, and we're going to look into the future. First of all, where do you stand on Denis Villeneuve's previous sci-fi movies? How do you feel about the cast that Villeneuve's put together? But most importantly, what, in your opinion, is the biggest obstacle or challenge facing Villeneuve as a filmmaker tackling this story?
Wait, John Krebs, far from the maddening Max crowd. All right, we're going to get back into that, Johnny. It's great. No, I think it's great. I have not wanted anybody else to tackle this. I feel selfishly like Villeneuve should be making more movies like Incendies and Enemies. He doesn't need and fucking Sicario. He kind of doesn't need to do more things like Blade Runner. That's for us, and I almost feel like we're stealing him from a higher purpose because he's such a prestige filmmaker. If this guy really wants to do franchise type stuff for a big studio, that's great, because the guy has yet to he's not fucked up. This guy has made fantastic movies every step of the way. So we got him doing this, and he's going to do it. We were talking about this, James, I guess a week ago. He's going to do, I think, the split, the it model for this thing. We're going to get one half of it now, and I assume that they're kind of like pre-green light of the second half. So,
or are they shooting them both at once and then just editing separately?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean,
I know they're shooting right now with an eye to November 2020 release of the first, but it's more economical to shoot them both at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. That's the way Johnny Depp did all those fucking Jack Sparrow movies. And it's saved Disney a shitload of money to do those all in Turks and Caicos at the same time. But I mean, this is the guy to do it. I mean, based on Arrival, based on, I loved all of his movies so far. I thought Blade Runner 2049 was the shit. I mean, it was just incredible how he made it his own. Imagine him playing in a sandbox. If they're going to throw away all the Dino De Laurentiis stuff, and of course they are going to, they're going to toss it all.
Well, they'll probably throw the weirding modules first, since, I mean, I was talking about this with Adam earlier about how for a movie that was already struggling to contain so much text, that to add something that wasn't from the book always seems I mean, at age 8, I thought the weirding modules were killer. Yeah, remember, as I was reading the novel, I was like, where are those voice gun things? Like, when are those things gonna pop up? But yeah, it's just a strange thing. But so I hope Denis Villeneuve will pick and choose carefully. But obviously, with 2 giant feature films, he's got enough material or enough space to work with where I feel like he can do justice to the entire text.
And here's the question: are we going to see Count Fenring? Because that's like,
I hope so.
He's like the one character we did not get in. And I mean, like, it was responsible to actually scissor him out. It made sense for Lynch to get rid of Fenring, but the question is, are we going to see him come back in the Villeneuve version?
Yeah. And also, Paul kicks the shit out of Feyd-Rautha when they throw down. Fenring would have killed Paul, and Paul even kind of acknowledges that privately. He's like, who is this guy and why can't I see him? But he came very close to being the supreme being that the Bene Gesserit were trying to breed, but he was born a eunuch. He was just, there was a slight genetic flaw, but Fenring is basically Paul with minus the ability to reproduce.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a dick. He's sterile, I think.
Yeah, he's shooting blanks, as they say. But I would love to see Fenring. I want to see a lot more material with Aaliyah. I want to see a lot more material with Jessica. There's just a lot more detail with these crazy, evil Bene Gesserit, not evil, but diabolical Bene Gesserit witches that I find absolutely fascinating. Right. But in terms of the casting, though, what do you think of like Lady Jessica and what they've picked so far?
It's dope. Like, the casting is fantastic. There's a couple of left turns. I would not have picked Aquaman for sure. I mean, I'm cool with it, but I think Dave Bautista as Glossu Raban, man,
perfect.
But that's Villeneuve's guy. It's like, we already know he can do that job. We've seen that performance. Like, we're going someplace with it. Yeah, the only roles I don't think so far that I've seen cast were Feyd and Shaddam Carino. I think those are the 2 big gets that are still left over. And maybe they got them and they just haven't announced them yet. But everybody else is out there. And so it's, the smaller guys from David Desmalkian, who was in Ant-Man, and he's playing Piter. It was a very important role. The guy who takes over for
He's one of the crazy guys in Dark Knight.
Yes, yeah. And he's in the guy's a character actor extraordinaire.
He's great.
Now. Yeah, he's great. But yeah, Rebecca.
What do you think about Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto? Because one thing is interesting how Paul's grandfather died fighting a bull, and I was always like, are they Spanish? And then as I was reading the books, there's a reference at some point about how they actually can trace their ancestry back to the Greeks.
The House of Atreides.
Yeah, but I think it's cool how they're bringing in Oscar Isaac, obviously Spanish speaker, etc. And I feel it just, for me, it matches kind of what I picture in the books.
Yeah, no, he's great. I mean, the thing is, Bill Hurt played him in the sci-fi adaptation, and they beefed the role up a little bit, or at least gave a weight to get an actor like Bill Hurt in there, and Jürgen Prochnow did a great job. You got two of these tremendous actors who've already been there. The question is, it's like, Duncan Idaho is a bigger role in this thing, presumably, than it would have been in the David Lynch version. And even in the John Harrison Sci-Fi Channel version, it was a smaller role because it was populated by a nobody. So some of these actors, are off. They just don't last very long. And there's no guarantee they're going to make a sequel. So it's not like Aquaman's going to get his shot at doing a bigger role as a Gola in
2, 3, and 4. Yeah.
Yeah. But everyone else, though, is pretty much on point. Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen is great.
I still yearn for an Orson Welles Baron Harkonnen, but Stellan Skarsgård, I'm sure, will do fabulous work.
He suffers from a little bit of obvious casting, but at the same time, I think he's uniquely qualified to do that job. So I can't complain about having a guy like that with his hand on the tiller. But everybody else seems great. I mean, that kid, Chalamet, fucking inspired, man. That guy did a great job so far. Everything I've seen him in is great, and he looks. I think he can hack it like a young McLaughlin did.
Yeah, he looks like a young elf boy. He definitely looks youthful. Well, Adam, I see you've rejoined us in the Sacred Hoop. So I think now we're going to start opening the door to some questions, because we've been gathering some questions on Twitter and we've been gathering some questions on Facebook. And if anybody in the chat wants to ask, by all means, fire away. Adam will be kind of monitoring that as well. And if you do a super chat, obviously you get priority. But Adam, I'm going to smack the tennis ball over to your side of the court. What do you got for us? What is the first question on the to-do list?
Well, first, I just have to ask, who did those really cool graphics you've been using to promote this live stream?
Mad genius by the name of Adam Rackoff. These animated movies. Yeah, for people who don't know, Adam Rackoff and I, we work together. We've done 3 animated shorts and 1 animated feature together. And Adam's actually produced a lot more beyond that as well. So he was kind enough to come in and help Bill and I bring this video in for a safe landing. And Adam will be returning in a few weeks' time to talk about some James Cameron and The Abyss.
True story. My the whole game I do with like GIFs and posters, I am just fighting Adam for superiority. Seriously, look, man, I'm like a Photoshop hack, and you're the guy who knows his craft, but it's like you showed me the future, the apex, the horizon of what you can do with these things, and I've just kind of been chasing that. It's like your T2 stuff that you did with Becky and Jamie on that episode. It's like, that's how you sell a fucking thing, man. You put a poster together and you nail it. I owe you a debt of gratitude, because it's like I would.
Next time we'll hire Tony Stella to do a full blown poster for it.
Yeah, and I could sit down with both you and James sometime. We'll do a little. I'll teach you how to enhance your graphics just a little bit more. It'll be great. We have some questions that were sent ahead of time via Twitter and elsewhere. Some of them you've touched upon, so I'm just going to ask them anyway. Maybe you can offer something new. We'll try to keep this quick, and then we'll get to some questions from the folks who are currently with us chatting right now. I thought this one was humorous. At Mr. Willie the Bum said, "I wish the Baron Harkonnen was less hideous in the movie. I dread looking at him for long periods of time in the film. I have to turn away or fast forward." And then he asks, "What is the purpose of the heart plugs?"
Bill, I'll let you take that one, because like him, I was also terrified of the Baron as a kid, and I love, in typical Lynchian fashion, he never explains that revolting skin disease, much like the gas that Dennis Hopper is sucking on in Blue Velvet. He just lets it be this horrible, rotten, filthy mystery. But what's going on with the Baron and his disgusting appearance, and why? What's going on with the heart plugs? Because that's obviously unique to the movie.
Well, like you guys notice in Dune, he gets Jack Nance in there, and Jack Nance is rolling a squeeze box the entire time, and that was one of those things.
Speaking of alive.
Yes, my Baron. that was one of those things where it's like it's that's addictive music, and that's in the book, but like watching it happen in the background, he's essentially a dope fiend, and he's just giving himself this samuta music, they call it, and it's happening in the same landscape as to watch the Baron get like Leonardo Cimino suck out these it's body horror, man. That's what it is. It's pure and simple. The heart plugs, the boils on his skin, Leonardo Cimino, put the pick in, Pete, and turn it around real neat. All that stuff it's body horror, but it's fantastic. Look, if
age
you want,
8, it was almost more like a take when he kind of sort of sexually assaults / kills / affectionately embraces this poor kid who's.
Is that what affectionately embraced looks like in your world?
I mean, that scene though, of all the scenes, really did a number on me as a little kid, because I had no idea what emotion it was going for or how I should feel. I just knew I was deeply, deeply disturbed. It didn't like traumatize me because I kept watching the movie over and over again on a loop, but it had just, it sent like seismic shudders throughout my entire system.
Yeah.
It's pretty gross when he puts a little spittle in her face. That's pretty nasty too.
Yeah, maybe those things weren't so much in the book. But look, if you want to see a Baron, there are two Barons. There are two other conceptions of the Baron, which there's the one from the John Harrison miniseries, who's played by Ian McNeice, an English actor who's corpulent. He also showed up in Rome, the HBO BBC miniseries. He played the town crier in Rome. So, the guy's got the build for it. And his skin is perfect. He's just extremely heavy. And he played a pretty much straight-on cunning Baron. He played him a little bit like a pederast, but more like a Roman senator. And this guy, there was a what was it called? The Emperor of Dune. There was a PC gaming series that came out, I want to say in the mid 90s, and he was played by one of these actors from Whose Line Is It Anyway? A very heavy-set American actor. I can't remember the dude's name, but he was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? There are a few other conceptions of the Baron, not played by Kenny McMillan, who did an amazing job.
Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant, totally brilliant. And Stellan Skarsgård is going to do a really wild job with it too. But I mean, there quite simply is not a character like the Baron. I mean, you could have not put.
It's the coolest evil name of all time, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. That's right. I don't care who you come up with. It's not cool. That it sends out waves of evil energy, and the fact that he's completely, utterly cunning, but he has his blind spots. The fact that he underestimates the size of the Fremen is his ultimate downfall. Yeah. And I love how he gets killed by a toddler who just takes him out. But he is an absolutely brilliant Machiavellian villain, and he's the perfect adversary to Paul.
Yeah, the funny thing is, Raban actually knew the size of the Fremen, and the Baron swatted him down and said, "Fuck that shit. It's like it's got nothing to do with this." But yeah, the Baron is the kind of character that you've seen very little of, in that he's so gross. In a way, there's a problematic aspect to the Baron because Herbert's stories are very heteronormative. I mean, if I'm just going to dip into this for a single second, and
straight is the word that I use, but I guess heteronormative is the 21st century terminology.
And you're correct to say that. But if in the fourth book, Frank Herbert introduces this cadre of female guards who are all essentially a women's softball team. They're these really built lesbians who are all banging each other in the back scenes, and it's like
strong as tanks, can like pick people up with one arm, etc.
The fish speakers, yeah, exactly. And it's like Frank Herbert's representation of gay people are either the Baron, who's a complete pedophile, or this softball team who are these sort of man-hating lesbians. And look, it's 1968, 1971. I can't expect this dude from wherever he is, Washington State, to be a little more, but this is just one of those. In
an era of true equality, villains can be anybody. So I often feel like there's a mistake people fall into where they think every time you put somebody who's not just like a white straight dude in a role, somehow you're like saying all people are like that. But in an era where everybody's on equal footing, your villains are occasionally going to be played by people who are historically have been disenfranchised, but that's not like a knock on them. He's just a villain who also happens to like young boys.
I mean, storytelling wise, the thing is that Fade and Raban were both brothers they're brothers from another mother. And the thing is, they're nephews of the Baron, And so he has to sort of incorporate his own nephews as heirs because he knows he won't have one for himself. So in that respect, you do have this. It's not a father figure so much. It's
he did produce Jessica, but it was by accident. He was like sampling a lot of different pleasures, and so Jessica was part of that.
Right. I mean, and the Bene Gesserit hypnotically suggests you into getting erect and getting on your back. It's like they actually stole Fade's semen. Like there's all sorts of weird shit going on here in the book. Like, Lady Margot insinuated herself into Fade's life and took his reproductive material. So like shit like that happens too.
Which is frowned upon. All right. Well, before we go too deep down this rabbit hole of very slippery territory, Adam, what's the next question?
Oh, right. We have our friend John Arminio, aka @QuasarSniffer on Twitter. He would like to know, is there a moment from the novel that has yet to be adapted to the screen, big or small, that you hope will be in the upcoming film version?
For me, it's the scene between Aaliyah and the Emperor and the Baron when they're interrogating her, and the Emperor is basically becoming aware of the situation as it stands, and they're also describing a raid where Paul's son, who's an infant, got killed. But they're talking about how an entire like legion of Sardaukar, not a legion, but like a group or a platoon, gets completely overwhelmed by old men, women, and children of the Fremen. And the Emperor's like, "What? My Sardaukar got taken out by like people just kind of chilling in a cave? Like, what are you talking about?" And Aaliyah allowed herself to be taken captive because she didn't want to be there when her brother learned about the death of his son. But it's a really lengthy bit of dialogue. And Aaliyah is so cunning and so terrifying in that scene. And obviously it ends with the Baron being killed by her own Gom Jabbar. But it's probably my favorite scene in the book in terms of all these terrifying individuals kind of clashing in one scene. So I really hope they'll flesh out that scene and make it happen. But Bill, what about you? Anything that hasn't been adapted yet that you'd like to see included?
Yeah, technically. But by the way, Johnny, I'm like, you're hitting it, bro. John Arminio set me up. It's like, he's the guy, fucking QuasarSniffer, man. You know what? I don't care what Adam Rackoff says about you. I think you are a solid citizen, man. All right. So my answer to that is that, believe it or not, the thing I really want to see was already covered in the Smithy cut of the movie, which, I mean, whether we get to it or not, the all the added footage that was on the ground had all these great moments that were really story beats that showed up, didn't show up. But I think you kind of need to see the knife fight with Jameis. And for
great scene.
Okay, yes, but for a specific reason in my case, I think that's the first moment where Paul's prescience fails him. He goes into a dark spot. He goes into a tunnel, and he doesn't know how he survives that knife fight. He doesn't know if he survives that knife fight. And the same thing happens later on with Fade in the throne room at the end, where he's like, I can't see what happens here. I don't know if I come out of it. He says, either way, I lose the knife fight with Fade, because if I'm a martyr or I'm a god emperor. But that's later on, with Jameis, it's like, it's the fear of mortality. I came through this whole dark night of the soul. We get into this cave, and all of a sudden, this fucking crazy ass bastard, played by Mickey from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Judd Omen, he's challenging him to a knife fight. And, like maybe he wins, maybe he loses, but it's like Jessica knows he hasn't killed anybody in cold blood yet. Like, he kicks that one guy's chest in on board the Thopter on the way into the desert. But this is like looking somebody in the eye. So it's a double important scene, because you have Paul like knifing down somebody for the first time,
learning to fight without a shield. He keeps whiffing because he's doing the delayed attack, trying to do the slow blade passes the shield. But James doesn't have a shield. Never thinks he's toying with him. And initially the Fremen are frustrated, think that basically that Paul's showing off, but he's just completely on a new terrain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of that and the combination. I mean, he inherits a wife from that scene. There's so many things that kick off so many other story points, and it's like his wife becomes Stilgar's wife, et cetera, et cetera. But also, it's there's the meeting with Stilgar where he's brought into Siege to Bar, but then like this thing really exhibits something about his prescience, which even the Lynch version kind of hints at a little bit, but not quite gets into. So I would like to see the Jameis knife fight, but that's asking a lot. Like there's so many mountains to move. I mean, his work is cut out for him, seriously.
Indeed. All right, Mr. Rackoff, what else we
got? Moose Matson from Twitter sent us a link announcing that Funcom would be creating a series of new Dune video games. This is from only about a month ago, so it seems like we're going to be getting a lot of multimedia, additional content as we lead up to this new film's release. What are your thoughts on that? And I think someone else, Christmas Ape, asked if either of you had ever played the Sega Genesis game. It was a real-time strategy game from back in the 90s. So.
I have not. I was not a Genesis guy. I was so loyal to Nintendo, then my Super Nintendo, then my N64. I kind of, apart from there was a cool Spider-Man game, I kind of missed the whole Genesis revolution. But when it comes to this new game that's being worked on, they did Secret, what the heck? Shit, hang on, I just had it up. They did Secret World and they did Conan Exiles.
Yes.
Neither game which I played, but they seem to have a great history with MMOs. I would kill to play a great MMO, especially an MMO in an environment that's before the first novel, where basically, because the story changes so much over time, but all the things that I want, like as Bill was alluding to, this feudal system, I want all this large families to be in place. I want the Fremen pure as they are, like before the big changes. So if I could roll up a Fremen character or a Bene Gesserit or a freaking Sardaukar and play in an open world environment, that would be insanely cool.
So you want like Knights of the Old Republic, James?
Yeah, I want basically like a Mentat class, and I want all these different classes to be available. I think it would just be absolutely fascinating.
So like all you got to do is like wish hard enough, and someone's gonna make that fucking game. No, seriously, it's like, why would you not do that? That thing.
I stopped wishing for toys when I wished for a bunch of superpowers action figures around age 7 or 8, and they didn't appear. I was reading a Vigilante comic, and at the back there's an ad for superpowers, and I prayed and prayed and prayed, and kept looking into my pillow, and I kept looking up, expecting all the action figures to materialize on my bed, and it didn't work.
You did get it.
It worked for me. Whenever I want something, I just wish for it. Just appears.
That's awesome.
So yeah, our very good friend Sky Wingfield, who's up very late or early, depending on how you look at it. He has a couple quick questions.
Pouring some out for Sky Wingfield.
He would like to. Well, first he states Lynch's adaptation made some controversial changes. We touched on this before, which many fans have bemoaned, such as the wielding modules, heart plugs, and Paul's Rainmaker ability. But what he wants to know is, are there any elements of Herbert's books that you think should be changed in the new films? Anything that you think may be outdated, or something that really just won't translate properly to sort of a visual medium?
Bill, I'll let you go first while I think about it. That's a hard one.
Well, the only theme I have, this is funny because I kind of wanted to bring this up. I mean, I sent the essay to you and James today, Adam, about, he wrote it, I guess, in the 80s. It must have been contemporaneous with the movie. The funny thing is that he wrote this in 65. And so the idea of Gulf states having this chokehold on the West infused this as much as the idea of ecology and the lifespan of the planet Earth in the Anthropocene era that we live in. And to think about now the idea that there were gas lines during the Carter administration where cars were backed up, that the Gulf states could choke the productivity of the planet Earth just because they want to inflict an oil embargo on the Western states, seems antiquated. And yet CHOAM, the Combine Hanate Ober Advancer Mercantile, is written as a cornerstone into this book series because, that was the world in which that Herbert lived in. And to a degree, we don't live there anymore. Like, there's no analog for CHOAM. We have corporate analogs. We have things, but people are presenting phones and fucking Androids, devices and Fitbits and things like that. We don't have oil, the lifeblood of civilization, which, the spice is crude oil.
That also makes you trip balls and evolve and mutate.
Yeah. So it's the split between, well, what keeps the lights on, what keeps the cars running, and also like how do you flick in that body chemistry thing? If you have a whole generation of people taking Molly and MDMA, how do you fix in what kids know about taking hallucinogens and or what do they call it? consciousness or some awareness enhancing drugs,
Consciousness expanding
conscious
hallucinogens.
expansion hallucinogens. Yeah, which I don't do. My wife does plenty. She knows a lot about that. I don't. But like that's
Next
the only,
appearance will microdose.
but that's the only thing that comes across to me is like would be lost is this. The firmament of Dune is based on Chom, and Chom, the kind of thing that Chom is, doesn't really exist anymore, and that I see. I don't know, James, you got something more than that?
I tend to lean. It's a mistake sometimes where I lean so heavily on the integrity of the source material, whether it's a comic or a video game or novel, whatever, where it's like, how dare you change anything? On the other hand, I'm a total hypocrite because when I watch Jodorowsky's Dune, we see evidence that he was changing like everything. Like Duke Leto was castrated, and like Paul ends up like becoming imbued with every single person on Arrakis, and the planet floats through the cosmos, spreading enlightenment. I mean, there's some really crazy changes he makes, and the whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, Jodorowsky's a genius. So I have this warring impulse where you shouldn't change anything. However, if you're a genius, change whatever you want because you have to make it your own. Denis Villeneuve. I'm always hesitant to use the word genius, is a very strong word, and he's still active. But I feel like he should make it his own, but I feel like he wants to do, like we was talking about making Blade Runner. I was at a panel at Comic-Con, and he said he wanted to make a Blade Runner 2049 because he didn't want somebody else to fuck it up. And I was like, that's the best attitude. He knows it's so easy to screw it up. He feels his responsibility to get it right. And I think he'll feel a similar responsibility with a text at this point. I feel like this is the closest I come to understanding what it means like to be like a fundamentalist, like a religious text. So I want him to do a good job. So Sky, I don't have a good answer for you because I hope they don't change a thing.
Well, wait, but Sky, I want to make sure Sky knows that we're broadcasting from Siege Lagavulin tonight, and this is definitely with him in mind. Sky loves the caches of fluid trapped under the surface of Arrakis. We're going to change the surface of the planet with. So,
I would love a planet that's got just like little caches of single malt scotch trapped all over it. All right, Adam, what's next on the to-do list?
Let's segue a little bit to some speculation about the new films that are coming, that are currently in production. Sky, as well as a number of other people who are currently talking right now, are discussing, debating the casting choices for the new film. What are your thoughts on these choices? And do any of the cast that has been announced, are there any that give you cause for concern?
I don't have a lot of experience with Zendaya, who plays Chani. I saw her in that Spider-Man movie, but she didn't even really have that prominent of a role. But I know she's like this giant pop star, so I need to learn more about her before I know if she would be a great Chani. I'm so in love with Sean Young because between Blade Runner and Dune, she just had like a lock on all the cool early 80s sci-fi flicks, and she's so mysterious and so exotic and so beautiful. So for me, she's an unknown. My prescience is hits a wall when it comes to Zendaya, but I really like Rebecca Ferguson. I loved her in the Mission Impossible movies that she's appeared in so far. So I'm really fired up to see her as Lady Jessica. So I hope she'll bring some of that same intensity. But honestly, apart from, I mean, we mentioned before, but the character playing Duncan Idaho, if they keep making these movies and it'll take like 5 or 6 to get up to the point where they're at God Emperor Dune, but they're going to be stuck with Jason Momoa for a good long while. So I hope he's such a great personality and he's so great as Aquaman, just like, yeah, and like jumping off cliffs and acting like this like long-haired maniac. But Duncan's a very different kind of character. So he'll definitely have to, I guess, evolve and stretch his acting muscles. But Bill, what about you?
No, I'm really accepting everything they're throwing at us so far, unless they cast Paul Rubens as Fade. I mean, so far everything is pretty cool. It looks like the Stephen Ferguson.
They should just bring Sting back. I mean, He looks the same.
Yeah, I think his stools may be a little firmer than they were back then on his diet.
Well, you know that silver mankin, he's still hanging on display proudly in his closet.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Rereading the last chapter of the book, I didn't realize he was stripped down to that thing for the final battle, and that's where the poison needle was held, which is actually topical, just not in the steam showers.
Yeah, it serves to be his undoing, though. It gets stuck on the floor in the last part. Take his ass out.
Oh, fuck, it just fucks him up. No, but everyone seems great, and they're not. All right, let me throw this at you. Charlotte Rampling is great. I kind of wonder what it would be like if Isabelle Huppert was playing.
She's my favorite living actress, so obviously I would be all for it.
That's it. That's it. All I'm saying is that, you know what? I bet you either they gave her a phone call or they just missed a connection, but she would have been a kick-ass Guys Helen William.
Terrifying.
I mean, for the kind of auteur that Sean Phillips, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right, who played Guys Helen William in the first adaptation. I mean, Isabelle Huppert would have just knocked this, and people would have paid attention to it. The thing would have been seen in like Burundi of all places if she was on board. It would have been a little different, but I mean, Charlotte Rampling is royalty. I can't complain about getting an
Also,
actor.
Mohim comes back for Dune Messiah, so it would be a lot of work. I mean, her dance card would be full for a couple of years.
Yeah, but I mean, they're incredible actors, and you know, you got Eminence Grease of films. You know, it's like the original Dune. You had Patrick Stewart and Cheyenne Phillips. I really don't know how to pronounce her name. It's Welsh. Sky can help us out here. But it's like they were veterans of I, Claudius. You know, they were BBC guys. They were RADA or RSC people from way back, and they knew exactly what they were getting in. And so now it's a little harder to find these people, but they found, like, what movie is going to mix Dave Bautista with Charlotte Rampling? That's a fucking good call, man.
Oh man, I wonder if he'll gain weight for it, because they talk about how the Beast is gaining some pudge and he's going to resemble his uncle before too long. Whereas obviously Bautista is nothing but like 300 pounds of hulking muscle. Maybe they'll have to put like a little fat suit on him, because if he's completely jacked, it doesn't show how like his lazy kind of decadent side.
No, I think they're gonna. Dave Bautista's ready to go out of the box. If he goes in with Drax physiology, if he's got his physique, I mean, I'm cool with it. You will buy it. The role he did when he fucking threw down with Gosling, like, you're supposed to believe Gosling could beat him in that cabin. It's like,
he would be snapped like a pretzel.
Not like a pretzel, just broken to a million pieces, like Snyder's of Hanover, into little bags.
Well, I did see Gosling one time in public. It was July 4th here in Manhattan. I was walking home, and he had a group of friends that was walking, and I just saw him. I was like, oh my God, this fucking Ryan Gosling. And he's pretty damn shredded. I mean, he's a very healthy, muscular, obviously, you know, handsome movie star, but obviously Dave Bautista is next level manliness.
Wait. John Cribbs, you're absolutely right. Actually, Paul Rubens would make a kick-ass Piter de Vries.
That would work.
I'm not even joking. No. Paul Rubens is exactly the right build, because Sharn. Thank you, Sky. Yes, she's pronounced Sharn.
Interesting. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, this is the benefits of having the Welshman in the chat.
I'm so glad he stayed up this late. I don't know what his deal is.
He says he's working all night. So yeah, so we're keeping Sky entertained.
He's got a baby on the way. It's all sorts of shit. That guy is like a hero among men. We can't. All these people in the chat room, man. These are real guys. But Sky in particular, I want to sit on his lap someday. It's a real deal.
Once again, shout out to Film 89. Check out his film site and his podcast. It rocks.
Do it. Absolutely do it, man.
All right, Adam. What else we got?
Patrick Glanville, who is chatting with us, has a couple good questions. One is, since they're making 2 films out of the first book, where do you both feel the first film should end?
I think at the end of part 1 in the novel. The part 1 is huge, but it's like basically it's divided into 3 different sections. In the middle is like Messiah, and like the second one, middle section is Muad'Dib. The third section is like the Prophet, I think. But the book's been written already in a way to have these perfect cliffhangers in mind, but that would allow you to do all the heavy lifting of establishing the universe, all the various families. There's so much intrigue and there's so much information you need to get through in that first third that I feel like that's where you could afford to take your time a little bit more. And then the more action-driven parts in the final third, when the Fremen are basically just taking out all the Beast Raban's, infrastructure, etc. Although I feel like Lynch's movie already once did this situation where they did the Cliff Notes version of the second half of the book, where like the first 2/3 of the movie is like the first like 150 pages of the book, and then it's like just like keeping this crazy breakneck speed. So I don't want it to get the short end of the stick again. But if you are going to follow the text, luckily Frank Herbert's already perfectly teed it up to give you those breaks that are perfect stopping points dramatically.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a natural. It's almost like a two book structure. I mean, even the novel charges headlong into that third to a degree where it gives short shrift because it's a lot of summary and not scene. Even the fucking battle scene at the end is like, what is that, 6 paragraphs, James?
Yeah, people talk about it after the fact, where you'll see like the Fremen jumping through a hole in the wall, and then it cuts in the next chapter and the battle's already over and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to rely on animatics to really flesh out an Avengers Endgame out of that. And I mean, I am here for it. I mean, I want to see every single blast of a laser gun. I want to see the atomics. Like, give
Atomics! As long as they say it like Patrick Stewart.
Well, yeah, but that's perfect. I will totally agree with you in that you should him looking into the starscape and sort of becoming the sleeper awakening. I mean, that's you're talking about like a perfect bicameral structure where half of him doing this and half of him doing that is perfect. And that kid, man, fucking Chalamet will nail it. I mean, we can't know what's going to happen, but Villeneuve has a pretty good sense. And who's the script? The script is by Spates and Eric Roth, who are not the biggest hacks in the universe. They are kind of close to halfway, 3/4 of being big hacks, but they should get the shit right. If he's the one directing it, then you can put a Hans Zimmer score on top of it. Then you got something fucking going there. Just don't get John Ottman to edit it. And
man, but that score from the Lynch movie is gonna be hard to top. Like just the background ambient music, and then the way it swells when they're riding the worm. The music, for all of its flaws, and David Lynch's film has many, I love it dearly. And one of the key ingredients is that extraordinary score.
All right. So seriously, I saw Toto in November on Long Island. They came here, okay? And they, like David Page, they played the Dune theme.
Oh, I would have peed my pants.
Yeah. Man, it was like just my pant leg was wet with a combination of urine and semen. It was like the thing I had been waiting for my entire life.
You just got this video disabled for ads.
It was such a big deal. No, I mean, I heard that music and it was like
a clinical term.
Yeah, it's scientific. It's purely scientific, Adam. You're right. No, but it's like I heard that music. Yes, I am conditioned to respond to it. But the thing is that Zimmer can get there, man. Zimmer can do it. Zimmer knows.
If anyone can, Zimmer can do it.
I feel like sometimes Zimmer gets overworked, and sometimes they need time to recharge their batteries. But I hope he'll bring. I mean, I just feel like the challenge of this text. It's so inspiring. It's such a Herculean challenge, and so many artists have taken a crack at it in the past. I feel like they all know that if they don't bring the best work of their career, they're going to just be ashamed of themselves forever. When you've had so many brilliant artists already take a crack at it in the past. So yeah, I hope that Hans Zimmer will bring his A game in a big way. Because obviously, with like some of the Nolan films and things like that, we all know what he can do.
In a way, like what is it? Johansson would have been more transcendent, and yet Johansson would not have given us a theme that we remembered. Zimmer will give us that like fucking Bane, Dishy Basara, like all that. Zimmer has a way to get those gigantic, he invented the bwomp, bwomp. That's, you gotta, give that guy credit. There's a lot of deal to invent a whole piece of vocabulary.
But when you think about Jodorowsky with like the Pink Floyd music and who is going to do the music for the Harkonnens? I can't remember, but every family, every planet's kind of its own music. It was the Anthem. Is that the group that was going to do the Harkonnen music? It was like this crazy French like death metal band. And then I just watched it last night. I should remember, but I do love what at least Jodorowsky was going for with all those different musicians that he was bringing to the table. But I actually have a question since we're in the question mode. Adam, since you haven't had a chance to rant yet, for people out there who are trying to navigate the complex waters of the various versions of Dune that are out there, the David Lynch, because I feel like there's so many different rival cuts floating around, some of which are authorized, some of which are not, some of which Lynch has signed off on, some of which is not. What is your guide? And Bill, feel free to chime in as well, since I know you've done some deep digging here as well. What is your kind of your playbook for people who want to understand the competing versions of David Lynch's Dune that are out there?
Well, there's of course, the theatrical, I think 137-minute cut, which is what most people have seen and which is available pretty widely on Blu-ray. And they're even doing a restoration right now that should come out sometime this year. Again, everybody's kind of realizing that there's a lot of money to be made off of Dune with these new films coming out. So they're doing a 4K restoration of the original negative, but it's of the theatrical cut. What exists elsewhere on the internet and on some Blu-rays and DVDs in other countries are TV cuts that were about 40 minutes longer. They range between like 178 minutes to almost 190 minutes. This adds a lot of additional footage that was cut from the theatrical, but it also removes some of the scenes, like the heart plug scene. It takes out scenes, which frustrates a lot of viewers, because for them, if they want an extended cut, they want to also see everything they saw in the original theatrical version. So when something that you're expecting is no longer there, it's sort of frustrating. So those cuts are called usually the TV expanded cut. Those have been given the Alan Smithy director credit, which, as many people know, is essentially a pseudonym for any film that the director wants to disown. They're unhappy with it because they weren't allowed to give it their sort of stamp of approval. So these TV cuts were not overseen by Lynch, and so he was forced to give it the Smithy director credit. But what some fans have done, and I have yet to be able to find these cuts, is essentially sort of do a fan cut where they integrate all of the various scenes and shots that have been in various TV cuts, everything from the theatrical cut, and on some DVD releases there are just scenes, extra scenes, deleted scenes that were never integrated, but they show you, and many of them are at various stages of quality. Some of them are pretty poor, they don't have visual effects or anything, or they don't have good audio, but they've assembled as long of a cut as possible based on the footage that's been put out there. And I think that cut is supposed to run closer to like 200 minutes if you can find it. Unfortunately, the one, Bill, that you had found was missing like the heart plug scene. So that obviously is one of the TV extended cuts. But then there's the long rumored 5-hour cut that has been going around for many years. And I did find it's on YouTube, an interview with Brian Herbert from a long time ago. And I can certainly post the link, where he says that his father, the author of the book, sat down with David Lynch and did screen a 5-hour cut of the movie, which he was generally very happy with. Now, this is likely just an assembly with unfinished visuals, unfinished, unmixed, all of that. But I think a lot of fans would still just like to see what was filmed. They would just like to see, if they took the time to direct and shoot these scenes, just sort of as a curiosity, it would be interesting to see everything that was shot assembled together and see if it feels more faithful to the book. I don't know. The extended cut that I have seen, I find it interesting, but as I said, it's missing a lot of the scenes that I enjoy from the theatricals. So I don't think there's a definitive version of this movie because Lynch was never happy with his director's cut, his theatrical cut that was put into theaters. So it's Bill, what would you add to this?
Well, it's funny you mention a lot of these things because these are the same arguments that I make with The Keep, which is quite literally my favorite Michael Mann movie.
Sure.
And
wow, you just kind of made my head pop open.
I've had the conversation with Marcus. So
I love The Keep, but wow, Michael Mann's made a lot of great movies.
We got Jurgen Prochnow hook up here. We got the whole thing going on. But the same thing, The Keep has a lot of the same issues that Dune does, where there is a lot of animatic, there's a lot of unfinished sequences that they will never put together for the ending. And also
there's some giant documentary coming about the making of. I know I helped with like the crowdfunding of something a couple of years ago, but I don't know if it's ever seen the light of day.
The Keep?
There's some documentary about the story behind The Keep and all the chaos and et cetera.
Okay.
But yeah, I know I backed it, but I'm not sure if it ever came out.
I'll take that. I mean, whatever it is. When I saw, Mann came to BAM like 3 years ago. I saw him with a bunch of friends, Nick Nadell, friends of the Throwing Real podcast. And he mentioned that, it's just like gone to the ether. You'll never see a Keep, but we're not here to talk about The Keep. But The Keep is like one of those things that the perfect version of The Keep is gone for all of antiquity because the footage is just burned. So I think Adam's 5-hour cut, I could live in that. Like, download my consciousness, like Transcendence, the the movie, just like Johnny Depp my brain into that for all of time. I think that we were talking about this when we were kicking around this concept of this show. The Alan Smithy cut is fantastic. The extended cut, I think, is very close to the Alan Smithy version.
Yeah.
There's a version online called the Spice Diver cut that is a fan
Sounds
edit.
really pornographic.
Does a little bit, James, but the idea was that they inserted some of the animatic. There were these full plate illustrations. Yeah, second favorite after Heat. Okay, I'll give you that, Scott. Yes, you're correct. Second favorite Michael Mann after Heat. But yeah, there's a delay here with a chat, but still, the beginning prologue that happens before Irulan's speech involves a lot of overdubbing. They show these still images of the Butlerian Jihad, and they show the Bene Gesserit school, and they show a lot of the other things that happened beforehand. Now, those aren't necessarily mission critical. Like, what's mission critical for me is that you don't make a cut of Dune where you do not feature the end to Thufir Howard's story. There's only one
Agreed.
version.
He's such a crucial character.
Such a fucking crucial character.
And probably the most melancholy, moving part of the closing pages of the book.
Yes. And Freddie Jones, as actors go, Freddie Jones is this guy, and I only realized in the last 2 or 3 years that he's Toby Jones's dad. Like, what a fucking lucky guy that Toby Jones gets Freddie Jones as a dad. Not to be confused with Freddie Francis, the guy who shot David Lynch's Dune. But you close out Thufir Howard's story with this moving bit, do him all honor. He served the Atreides faithfully for something like 4 generations.
And Paul basically almost exposing his neck, and if you're here to kill me, do it.
And he does that in the book.
And Thufir turns to the Harkonnens like, I've served 3 generations of Atreides. And it moves me nearly to tears every time I read it.
It's great. There's again, you said there's one of the father figures, but like to represent that in film, I don't expect Villeneuve to get that correct. And to be honest, he's exonerated from having to do so. But if he did, I'd be so down with it. I mean, it's like, that's motion filmmaking technology, the likes of which even God has never seen.
Nice. All right, Adam, any other juicy ones? I see, I guess there's some people in the chat that I know from Twitter that I don't think I've said hello to yet. So Joe Duffy, what is happening? Adrian Mendoza, what is happening? I'm seeing a lot of, I am moved, speaking of being moved to tears by the book, I am moved to tears by so many familiar faces from Twitter who are hanging out in the chat, geeking out about Dune. So to everybody that I know from Twitter or YouTube, you guys have my eternal gratitude for showing up for this.
Joe Duffy is the greatest, man. I talk to Joe Duffy like daily, and that guy fucking is the king.
Well, I think it's proof that we're gonna have to do a lot more of these live streams in the days, weeks, and months to come.
I'm gonna moderate, and you and Rackoff are gonna do a show, and that's how it's gonna work.
Beautiful, excellent. All right, Adam, any other juicy ones?
Well, Patrick Glanville also wanted to know if you think that the Princess Irulan, is that how you say it?
Irulan.
Yeah, Irulan should narrate the new films. Or if not, who do you think should be? Obviously, she only narrated the theatrical. Those extended cuts were not narrated by her, obviously. But
the book places huge emphasis on her by having so many chapters opening with a quote that comes from the diaries of Muad'Dib, but oftentimes are being relayed to us by the Princess Irulan. And you want to talk about a book that is almost embarrassingly overflowing with brilliant quotes about politics and religion and philosophy. It's the most profound novel I've ever come across. But you could basically spend days. I get why some people now, like if they're really into like a certain religion, will constantly quote that text to kind of wrap up a point on a particular argument. I guess there was one thing like we were having an argument about something in our little wrong reel chat room, and I was saying like, you're best known by what you despise, or something to that effect when it comes to Paul's relationship with the Harkonnens. But it is the most quotable thing ever. So it would be cool if they could find a way to periodically insert that as like a framing device, but it might feel narratively clumsy because obviously literature and film are 2 different mediums. So how you can make that feel organic to the film would be a huge challenge.
Did you see the sci-fi adaptation?
I did.
All right, because John Harrison completely rewrote that thing to fit Irulan into it, and it was so clumsy. I mean, I get that they cast a decent actor to do it, but he was so intent on making that a part of the story that he overwhelmed Dune. Like Irulan goes to Giedi Prime and she bones down with Fade Rautha in the sci-fi story. Like there are things that just don't belong there. But they beef up the role in the wrong way. It's like I'm not saying it suffers from adaptationitis, and yet it suffers horribly from adaptationitis. In a way, in Dune Messiah, somebody throws back in Irulan's lap that her name is an anagram for ruinal, and I don't know if Frank Herbert intended that to be the case or not, but she is like spare parts, and the outgoing chapter of Dune has Jessica saying, or no, it has Paul saying to Chani, she will never know warmth or affection.
Yeah, she'll have my name, but she will never know the affection of my embrace. I'll keep you first in all my counsels, etc.
And the irony is that in Dune Messiah, just about any single little bit of cruelty or lack of cruelty would have led to a diffusing of the bomb that took his eyesight. Or the eventual fate that seems like such a left turn in Dune Messiah. If you had incorporated Irulan into the plan a little bit, if you'd shown her a little more humanity, and Paul knew that, but Paul decided not to do it because he was already on a course. But Irulan could be an important character. It depends on whether you're going to do the sequel or not. I mean, Virginia Madsen showing up as that floating head in the space field.
I love it.
Yeah, I love it, man. It was all I needed. Virginia Madsen is a great actress. It took a bunch of decades before she did Sideways. And I'm totally into her, and she's fantastic. She got that Oscar nomination. She's a fantastic performer, better than her brother. I will go on record as saying that. But whether or not she becomes an important part of Dune, she doesn't need necessarily.
She was great in Highlander 2, The Quickening, also.
Oh, yes. Yes, the time is now. Yeah. Perfect.
Beautiful.
That's our next live stream, Highlander 2.
We can make that happen without a doubt.
I think I've relayed all the messages that I was sent. Unless anybody would like to, if I missed anything here on the live chat, if there's any additional questions, we can take them now.
I say one from Adrian Mendoza. He says, do you guys think Denis Villeneuve spoke to Alejandro Jodorowsky about Dune? Something tells me that if they've had any correspondence, it would be from one younger filmmaker to another, where he would give him the utmost respect and probably would defer to him. But I doubt he's consulting with him creatively, because in the end, these guys have huge egos and soaring ambitions. And I imagine that would, I don't think it's high on Villeneuve's. I know nothing, and I've never heard him. This is pure speculation on my part, but something tells me Villeneuve's goal with this film is not to make Jodorowsky's Dune a reality. Although there is that giant tome with all the great Moebius art, and it is one of Jodorowsky's dreams one day that someone will make it into an animated movie. So who knows? Stranger, crazier things have happened in this world, but something tells me that Jodorowsky's Dune will probably live on our imaginations, and as a result of living on in our imaginations, it will always be this masterpiece that probably no movie that ever gets made could hope to measure up to. It's the movies that you can't see that people really salivate over, almost to the point of absurdity in some cases. Like with me, like Orson Welles and Magnificent Ambersons. I'll never see the full Magnificent Ambersons, so for me, it's like this towering masterpiece. Whether or not it actually was, who the hell knows?
Yeah, and does Villeneuve need an occasion to call Jodorowsky? If he does, if this was the thing that put them in contact with one another,
cast him as the emperor.
We don't have a fucking emperor.
Movies have heart, have mind.
I did not read the book. I never read the book.
Oh man, he's such a character. I love him.
It'll be fantastic. But if you need Villeneuve to actually get on the phone with Jodorowsky, let this be that reason. I'm perfectly okay with that.
And make it a podcast and put it online, because I want to hear that conversation.
I would totally listen to it.
I have a question. What are you guys most looking forward to or most excited to see in the new films? Like for me, I'm excited for the world building. It's something that was much harder in 1984 and 85 when they made Lynch's Dune. I mean, you really only see like a couple establishing shots on each world. There's very little in the way of world building in that sense outside of Arrakis. So you obviously see a lot more of Arrakis, but I mean, like Gidi Prime, it's like one shot. It's like
I want to see the Emperor's prison planet where he trains his Sardaukar legions. I want to see that world where apparently they live like total ballers there. Like the conditions are horrible, but if you make it, they actually do live very, very well. But when they go to battle or they go on a mission, they're complete total psychopaths. But I would love to see a little. It's barely hinted at in the books, but that would be it would be cool to get a glimpse of that.
Jamie, there's an issue of G.I. Joe Cobra from IDW, which is all about that. It's the idea that how are the Vipers trained? And
nice, beautiful.
Yeah, they're washed out. I mean, this is like a legendary comic from the last 25 years no one's seen. But I assume it's a lot similar to the Sardaukar, where it's like, if you get through, you're a true believer and you believe in the prophet. You got Chom benefits. You are on board. Like, why would you be a Viper in Cobra? Anybody in this chat who's not already aware, I'm like the Cobra Commander dude. I'm just trying to.
I was once a man.
I have one coming up, Adam. I got a snake. I got a snake one coming up for the first time.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, it's like the Viper thing and the Sardaukar thing. There's a lot of overlap, and yeah, I could totally see that being the case. That'd be awesome if that was there.
Excellent. Well, since we're out of questions, I just wanted to emphasize one last time. I can't thank everybody enough. Oh, Duncan the Small, I know him from Twitter. Very cool. Great to see him. Jodorowsky's film is better left unseen. We all know it's a masterpiece.
I agree totally. Yes, that is completely the case. That movie is unmakeable, and I would rather see it as a Steven Scarlatta documentary. I am chill with that beyond belief.
Scarlatta, who has been on the podcast, and I've actually had drinks with Frank Pavich, the director of the movie. We met at a film festival over in Hong Kong. He's a super cool guy. But yeah, man, just that movie, and just the idea of Salvador Dali as the emperor. When I was watching last night, he's talking about how like even Dali does not know what his paintings mean because Dali only creates enigmas. It's like, where are those artists today? Artists who create enigmas. I feel like there's so many artists today that let you know precisely what they're thinking at every second. It's like, I want some more enigmas. Ambiguity is the home of the great artists, and sadly, Salvador Dali, those guys don't come very often.
Yeah, this is a cool comment about the when they made Blade Runner 2049, they did a series of short films, some animated, some live action, that sort of led up to the events that helped kind of add context to the opening scenes in the film. It's being suggested, that could be a really cool thing for Dune as well, to kind of help tell some of the backstory, but doing it in a way that sort of, it kind of creates a build up to the release of the film.
Specifically, one of the appendices is from the point of view of Liet Kynes' father, talking about their plan for terraforming the planet. Like, it'd be cool to get some supplementary. They're never going to include that in the movie. It's right. It's like Return of the King at the end. It has all these giant appendices that are incredible, but it's a lot to try to cram into a flick. But there's definitely some beautiful stuff in there about the Bene Gesserits, etc., in the appendices, where it'd be great to have that supplementary material in advance to flesh out the world, so that the heavy lifting, or some of it's already been done for people who want and crave that kind of
right. Like, it'll work building. Without it. It could work without that. But if you want to go deep into the mythology, then it's out there for you to kind of help add an extra layer of understanding and get you pumped for the film.
Well, I feel like that the ones that were done before Blade Runner 2049 were specific to the movie. It was actually a good guide. Do you guys remember before Matrix Revolutions?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And Jamie, you referred to this when you did the
Matrix. Yeah. Well, because the second Renaissance in that parts 1 and 2 is one of the coolest animated films I've ever seen. It absolutely floors me every time I watch it.
The thing that you did on your channel about that Netflix short,
Love, Death and Robots. Yeah,
Death and Robots, which I haven't watched yet, and that's exactly the vibe I got. Where if you did a couple of small animated shorts, mixture of hand drawn, or at least the facsimile of hand drawn,
hire Bill Clinton.
Yeah, hire Bill if he's available. But if that plus 3D animation, you could do like a series of 4 or 5 kick-ass animated shorts. You could do the Balerian Jihad in the most, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse type, like twitchy animated style. You could do House Atreides with the old man bullfighting. There's so many small little bits that are just character pepper that you spray on the top of it. And I could totally see, like, which studio is it that's handling this? I don't even know which.
It's Warner Brothers.
It is WB? Okay, so
Yeah.
they're a bunch of cockfuckers that have no idea. Maybe Disney can like unfuck this shit because they bought Warner's. No, they bought Fox. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Warner
Yeah.
Brothers. Yeah,
the,
no, so
the Lagavulin
it's
is
hopeless.
season
But
hold.
but Warner did Matrix, and Warner's also did the Blade Runner films. So it's conceivable that this is something that they would do again.
Yeah, Warner's did this other thing with the Matrix Reloaded, where no, it was Revolutions. They did a PlayStation 3 game.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yeah, it had like 30 minutes of live action footage, which actually is part of the canon of
Absolutely.
what
Like
happens.
Jada Pinkett
Yeah.
Smith is in it, and
Yep.
that was pretty well done.
Monica Bellucci
Yeah.
was in it, and
Yep.
like they did. There was a whole like sapphic kiss scene between Jada Pinkett Smith and Monica Bellucci. Why would you just dump that on the game? And yet
I know.
we're ballsy enough to do that. We don't give a fuck. And imagine if Dune did something like that, which they won't. But I think the idea of doing the extended universe stuff off the margins is entirely in concept. This movie deserves it. Even if you're not
At a bare minimum, a great series of movies adapting the first 3 books. And I feel like you could almost do the 4th one as like a standalone movie with a different director. Make it like Akira, like some crazy animated extravaganza. Somebody very wisely pointed out recently on Twitter the other day that it feels almost like the first 3 books are a trilogy, but that the 4th feels like its own thing in a lot of ways, because obviously it's separated from it by thousands of years. It would be cool to see whoever plays Duncan Idaho carry over, but to put the worm or to put the tyrant on film and in all of his glory, it could very easily be really stupid looking if you don't do it perfect. If you do it perfect, it'd be terrifying and horrible and beautiful and wonderful and all those things. But if they can just what I'm terrified of is, say the first part 1 of Dune by Villeneuve is a flop, and then they get cold feet about part 2 and make a lot of changes or truncate it. It's like there's so many things that can go wrong. Right now, all I want, fingers crossed, is Villeneuve to bring these first 2 movies in for a safe landing and have them do relatively well, the same way Blade Runner 2049 did. And that way, no one will come in and feel the need to whip out the scissors. But in that, we're getting toward the end of this live stream. Bill, first and foremost, I just wanted to thank you for carving out so much time and answering all these questions. And Adam, playing the role of gatekeeper. I'm indebted to both of you guys, so I can't thank you enough. And I definitely want to do more of these in the future. But Bill, I want to give you a chance to offer your final take on the film, since you are my guest, and I just want to hear any closing thoughts that you may or may not have had a chance to expand upon up to this point.
Well, Jamie, thank you for bringing me on this. And Riggedy Rackoff, you were like the fucking guy. This is really important. This is so much fun to invent a live stream workflow.
But it takes me back to my World of Warcraft days.
Dune, if anybody, it's like, can you recreate the laboratory conditions that created a fiend like me who would later do...
Small interruption. Bill Tech is in the house. I just want to give him a shout out.
Yeah, Bill, of course. Bill is here.
Yeah, Bill and Bill are working together on a secret project here in New York.
Yeah, no, we are working on a secret project. I am the lesser component. But what would it take? The laboratory conditions to get me back to 84 to sign on the dotted line, or as Al Pacino said, sign on that line which is dotted for like a sci-fi epic. I don't know what it was it did to me, where it just picked my locks. It got in. It was a combination of Frank Herbert and Dino De Laurentiis and what's his daughter's name?
Raffaella.
Yeah, Raffaella.
One a total badass producer that oftentimes gets overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't mentioned her yet. It's so super important because we're still talking about it today in 2019 because she did the legwork she did back then with casting and everything else. That's such a big deal. And, like Frank Herbert's books have been out there for a while. And fucking, like, we didn't even talk about, like, did Kevin Anderson and Brian Herbert's canonical books, like, count? I haven't read a word one of them, and yet I still accept the text that they've written in so much as, like, they're fleshing out the Holtzman effect and different engine technologies. I feel like I'm enthralled to what they came up with. At the same time, I don't give a fuck because it's not part of the original 6 books. And
I think Herbert died of something like a brain aneurysm or something, like in his mid-60s. He died abruptly because I think Chapter House Dune had just come out, and then.
Okay, I mean that's fine. Yeah, it ended in medias res because he invented Marty and Marty and Daniel, I believe, are the two characters they came up with, who were supposed to be in like the 7th Dune book. And they never did. And you know, Duncan Idaho's the only character left over. And I will confess to America, as everybody's watching Simon Cowell tonight on this live performance, I've only read up to Dune Emperor. I have not read 5 and 6 beyond that. But I'm okay with that, because I would allege that Dune Emperor is the end of a 4-book discrete quartet. And I mean, 5 and 6 are great. And I started reading 5. I've only got about halfway through. But, you know, like, what did Herbert do to get a guy like this on board? You know, he threw it out beyond what I was reading at the time for the actual book itself. But what did Lynch do? What did the producers do back in '84 that got a young child, a 9-year-old boy like me on board? Maybe you can't recreate those in a laboratory experiment, but I'm hooked for life, and this is my brand. You know, like, I am there for all of the Star Trek and all the Star Wars, but Dune is just going to be the center of it. And
it's like Dune is to science fiction. It makes like, if you're talking about fantasy, like the novels, like the Lord of the Rings, like Lord of the Rings makes a lot of fantasy out there feel like Beastmaster. Like, it's fun, but it's, you know, second, third tier. Dune makes a lot of science fiction feel like Beastmaster. And my hope is that if Dune's a roaring success, it might usher in, this is totally naive and on my part to say this, but it might usher in a new era where serious, dense, highbrow sci-fi can have more commercial prospects. And you might see some other series getting a fair shake that otherwise might have been ignored just due to their complexity.
I think that the idea that, you know, like, Hulu latches into Joyce Carol Oates and
or Amazon doing friggin' Robert Jordan series, The Wheel of Time. I mean, the wheels are already in motion for these big giant whoppers to get adapted.
I mean, even like, you know, Handmaid's Tale showing up on Hulu is like a big deal. And I just can't see Frank Herbert supplanting the current zeitgeist. And it's cool. He doesn't need to. It's fine. You know, we're in the world of Captain Marvel. And I'm all right with that.
But we're also in the world of The Expanse. I mean, The Expanse is 8 books and counting, and they're being made into a series, a rough, kind of sort of a season per book, or like a season and a half per book, and they're nailing it. And it's some of my favorite stuff on TV. I'm on book 5 right now, Nemesis Games, and they're just crushing it. So sci-fi is in a very healthy, good place right now.
How do you explain that whole thing about The Expanse? Because I'm like watching your recaps on this channel, and I'm trying to figure out, like, what is the difference of what they're doing as opposed to other sci-fi franchises, James? Because The Expanse has a hold on your imagination, and we're like, you know, non-genetic twins, and I appreciate that. But
we at least have the same taste in booze,
and the same taste in booze, and the same hair patterns. But it's like, what is The Expanse doing that the other guys are not doing that earns them this money from corporate, like, FANG companies?
Because the first book and the first season, there's an ingredient in there, I'll just say it's the proto-molecule that scared me. And it scared me in ways that I can't even properly put into words, but it's such a disturbing concept. And everything about this sci-fi franchise is very grounded in what the future might look like. And then they just have this one, it's kind of like introducing the dragons in Game of Thrones. Otherwise, it's a very grounded medieval environment, except for the dragons. It's the same thing with The Expanse. It's a very grounded, futuristic look at what the solar system might be like once Mars has been colonized and the outer ring has been kind of like, you know, basically we're going out past Saturn, etc. But then this ingredient called the protomolecule gets discovered, and it throws everything into complete, total fucking chaos. And the first book's a blast. First season is a blast. But right now I'm on book 5, and it's the Empire Strikes Back of the series. It's so dark and so cool, and the characters get scattered and they all get tested. I'm absolutely riveted, and I've got book 6 on deck. But I don't want to. We'll save that for a rainy day for when you actually start reading and watching The Expanse, because it's an equally valid topic. But I just want to bring this in for a safe landing and say thank you to everybody who's watched this video. You have my eternal gratitude. We'll definitely do more of it. I've had an absolute blast. Adam, where can people find you on Twitter if they want to talk more to you about any sci-fi topic we've discussed so far?
At Adam Rackoff. You can see it at the bottom, right below the video there, the window.
Indeed, it's in the
click on that.
Below.
If you follow me, I'll follow you back. I try always to do that. So yeah, would love to chat with anybody about any of this further. I've been having a few little side conversations over here, so would love to continue that offline as well.
Beautiful. And Mr. Scurry, where can people find you? Your podcast, your Twitter, your daily Cobra Commanders, all that good stuff.
Well, at William Scurry on Twitter, that's where I live. But my podcast is I Don't Get It. And, we cover stuff as pedestrian as aloe juice and Zendaya. I guess we might eventually do Zendaya. But yeah, Daily Cobra Commander lives there, and I'm going to drop my video series. I keep threatening this essay series on everybody. It's coming soon. I am 9 out of 10 episodes, heartily into the 10th episode on Kenneth McMillan, which is topically appropriate.
My little brother's in the channel, Billy Armfield. Shout out to my baby bro. He's been on the podcast, Be Dumb's Wrong Reel, and he is a mass. He's actually finished all the existing Expanse novels, and he just reread Dune.
Taste in breath is definitely genetic.
Yeah, but he's a diehard sci-fi fan in his own right. He's played D&D with me for years, read every comic book ever set in front of him, so he knows his shit on this topic.
Wait, is that one of the younger? Is that a younger?
12 years my junior, yeah.
And I am totally into you, Billy. Like, we are name cousins and also topic cousins too.
Well, guys, thanks so much again for listening. And yeah, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this. Give it a like, all that good stuff. And you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrax. That is the best place to reach me. But thanks for everybody tuning in. Chunk, that's Billy's real name.
Fred Schaefer.
I will see you in the very near future because Chunk is expecting a man child or a boy child or a boy. What's this term Stilgar uses for Paul? I will take the boy man.
The boy man.
He's expecting a boy man of his own in the very near future. And hopefully he'll raise him in the same tradition in which I tried to help raise my baby bro. But thanks so much for listening, everybody. We greatly appreciate it. And we will talk to you later. Onwards and upwards. All right, I'm stopping the broadcast now.